promises made. So what it'll do is look at payments, and then it'll try to reconcile those payments against those promises that the customer or customers have made. So to run the process, I would go in and just click OK. And there is an optional parameter here, business unit. So that means you could run this process for specific business units, but if you leave it blank, it'll run for all business units. Okay, so if I click on submit now, this process is going to run. I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay, and a confirmation is given. What I will do next is just to track the process to make sure that it finishes successfully. Now, what this promise reconciliation program will do is that it will assign a status of either fulfilled or broken, to those payment promises based on the promise dates. Okay, so fulfilled means that that payment was made, and broken, of course, means that the commitment that the customer made to send that payment was not really fulfilled. There was no payment received, and therefore the payment promise, is considered to be broken. So I'm going to return to the slides, and we'd like to talk about statuses and states. So first, let's focus on promise status. The promise status indicates the specific condition of the promise or promises. So you can see here some of the statuses that I mentioned: the broken status, the fulfilled status, so that means that the payment was made. You might see the status collectible. That means that there's an open promise out there that has been created but has not reached that due date, that commitment date. And then you see the status closed as well, where you will see that the payment was made on or before the promise date. Okay. Now, of course, there is the ability to cancel a payment promise, and later on when I do my demo here of this functionality, I will show you how to do that. Let's talk about state. The state indicates the overall standing or condition of that promise or promises. And so here we have two, either broken or the state of promise. And that means that you're looking at an open commitment which details the amount to be paid and the date that the customer has committed to pay by. Now here's a look at the promises infotile. The promises infotile is found in the collections work area. Okay, that will be where a collector would navigate and view the customers assigned to him or her. List of customers, and of course, by clicking on a customer, the collectors can see transactions, can see aging, can see done in history, conversations that have been recorded in the applications. We call them notes. All of that information is available. Now, in that landing page, when a collector goes to the collections work area, they are going to see not only the promises infotile, but other infotiles as well, as you will see in a moment. So what does this graphical container or object displays? It displays detailed information on open and broken promises. Now here you see in this picture that there is one collectible payment promise. That just means that there's an open payment promise, and the commitment date or due date has not yet arrived, has not been reached at this point. Once that payment process passes its due date, then of course it's going to be considered broken. You do have to remember that if you configure grace days, it's going to be the commitment date plus the grace days, and then after those days, those grace days have passed as well, then that promise is going to be considered broken. Now here we can also see that there is a delivery report that we highlighted earlier. That will be the promise reconciliation report. There is a process, but in connection with the process there's also a report, right? So this is the report. This report will display promise information by collector, based on business unit and date range. Now, of course, if we review what the process does, the promise reconciliation process, we know that that process, that program, is going to look at payments and trying to reconcile those payments versus payment promises that customers have made. That's what the process does. It does that reconciliation. The report will give a user information based on different parameters. You can run this report by business unit, by collector, by currency, and you can even use date ranges. A date from and a date to parameter. And in terms of the format, you can view the output in Excel or PDF and even HTML, which is another option. So you have three options there: HTML, PDF, or Excel. Now, what I would like to do now is demo the functionality. So I will create a promise in the collections work area. Then I'm going to navigate to the collections work area, to the landing page, and review the promise from the promises infotile. So I'm going to click on the promises infotile to view promises that have been made by my customers, because I'll be acting as a collector. I'm going to log in as a collector to do this demo. And then finally, I'm going to show you how to cancel a promise in the collections work area. So let me navigate now to the application. Now here I have logged in as Jim Jones, a collector. And from the home page, I'm going to click on collections and then collections again, this collections icon. Now we can see the infotiles, and as I mentioned, there are other infotiles besides the promises one. There's the strategy tasks that these are things assigned to me so that I can complete them. It can be something like making a phone call or making a personal visit to the customer. Other collection activities might be assigned, so I can view details on these things by clicking on the hyperlinks. And of course, it gives me a list of delinquent customers that are assigned to me. So here we see that there are two promises, one that's broken and one that's collectible. So if I click on the broken one, it looks like there's a promise that this customer is a solutions made. And of course, the promise date has passed at this point. And if we remember the settings in collections preferences, we have grace days set to 0. So once that promise date comes and goes, we will consider that promise to be broken. Now here, if I click on the promises infotile, then I can see another promise. Looks like there's two here, one that's broken and one that's collectible. In any event, what I want to do here is return to the previous screen, the previous page, and select a different customer. So I'm going to pick this customer, Fox Stores. And here, of course, I want to be in the Transactions tab. There are other tabs that allow me to review donning history, correspondence history, agent information, and of course, general information about the customer here in the Profile tab. But I'm going to go to Transactions and pick this first invoice here, the C10026.9. That's the invoice number, the transaction number. So once I select this transaction number, I will be able to process the payment promise. So I'm going to click on Promise after selecting the transaction, and we can see here that there are different regions of the promise to pay page. The first section or region shows the transaction. Then of course we have the promise details. So that will be the transaction number here, or invoice number C10026.9. We know that it is in delinquent status, and the due date, of course, is in the past. That's why it is delinquent, and the amount overdue. In the middle, we have the promise details. So here I can populate potentially a payment method if the customer indicates how they're going to pay. Maybe they want to pay using electronic funds transfer, that or direct debit, that is an option. But it's not going to force me to put in a payment method. What I do need to put in here is the promise amount. Now, notice that the promise amount is defaulting to the amount overdue. Maybe the customer is not paying, is not promising to pay the full amount, but is promising instead to pay partially. So I'm going to put in 75,000 here, and here's the promise date, of course, that I need to update this field. Let's say that they promise to pay in a few days from now, about 5 days from now. At the bottom, you see the third section. If, as a collector, I was processing a payment promise that involved more than one transaction, of course, those transactions will show, you will see the information about those transactions here. Now here we know that it's only one transaction, but this is the section of the promise to pay page that will include information about mass promises, which is not the case here. The customer is just paying one single, or promising to pay partially a single invoice. So I have my promise amount here. What I will do now is go ahead and click on submit. Okay, so it says the promise or promises have been saved. So I'm going to hit OK. Then click on done. Now that takes me back to the landing page here where I was before. And now I can see that the promises Infotile is showing updated information. So we see here now that it's showing two collectible payment promises. So I'm going to click on that link. And of course I see the payment process that I just created for these customer Fox stores. So what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and click on, I can click on any of these links here. And it takes me back to the payment process. Now, to the payment promise, excuse me. Now, once I'm here, I have, of course, the ability to review the details, of the payment promise once again, and I can update it if I need to. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit cancel to return to where I was. Okay. Now notice here that I can select the payment promise and click on the button cancel promise. Because the due date or promise date is in the future, I'll be able to do that. So notice here I'm selecting the row. This is the promise that these customer Fox stores made. And so I'm going to click on cancel promise. So, and then I'm going to hit yes to that message there that this is not something that can be undone. All right, so I'm going to return now to the PowerPoint. As we can see here, the promises Infotile has been updated. So I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. So we've talked about a number of things in this topic. Features such as creating payment promises for one or multiple transactions, deliver metrics such as promise amount and broken promise amount, and of course the promises Infotile that can help a collector focus on promises that customers have made, as well as the promise reconciliation report. That's a report that can provide a collector with very critical information about payment promises. In addition to that, we've also discussed the promises reconciliation process or program. This is a program that automatically will look at the promises made by a customer and compare those to payments made and do a reconciliation. We have also discussed configurations that are found in the preferences, in the collections preferences page. If you navigate to the functional setup manager, grace days, future, number of days to make a promise, including sending promise notices to customers. we have also given you a demo of the payment promise functionality. I navigated to the collections work area, selected a customer, identified and selected a transaction, and proceeded to create a payment promise. And then after creating the payment promise, I reviewed the details and went on to cancel the payment promise in the collections work area. So this concludes the topic, creating payment promises. So we'll take a break now and come back for our next topic.